I'm sorry, Lynn, but Madison and Jake they don't quite fit with the cousins. You understand, right? The dynamic is already perfect. My mother's words hit me like a slap as I watched my kids, my bright, kind 8-year-old daughter, and my shy, thoughtful 10-year-old son, building a makeshift fort in our backyard. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, trying to steady myself. Mom, they're your grandchildren too, just like Alyssa's kids. Of course they are, honey. Her voice took on that patronizing tone she reserved for when she thought I was being difficult. But Carter and Emma have been going to the lake house with us since they were toddlers, and this year we're also taking them to that exclusive camp in Maine. It's tradition now. Tradition, right? A tradition that conveniently started after my sister Alyssa got divorced and my parents decided she needed extra support. Meanwhile, when Dave lost his job 3 years ago and we struggled to keep our mortgage payments current, their support amounted to Dad emailing me links to job postings and Mom suggesting I try couponing. You could come by yourself, my mother added, like she was offering me some grand compromise. Dave can watch the kids for a week. It would do you good to get away. I looked out the window again at my children. Madison was carefully arranging stones around the fort's perimeter, her face scrunched in concentration. Jake was hanging back, giving his little sister space to create, offering suggestions only when asked. They were good kids, kind kids, kids who deserved grandparents who adored them as much as they adored their cousins. No thanks, Mom. If my kids aren't welcome, then I don't need to be there either. Don't be so dramatic, Lynn. This isn't about your children not being welcome. It's just, I've got to go. Dinner's almost ready. I hung up before she could say anything else, before I could say something I'd regret. That evening, after tucking the kids in, I sat at our kitchen table with Dave, nursing a glass of wine. Let me guess, he said, his eyes understanding. The annual grandparent-sponsored vacation is happening again, and once again, we're not family enough to be included. They're taking them to some fancy camp in Maine this year, too. I swirled the wine in my glass. Mom suggested I come alone. Dave snorted. Of course she did. Anything to make you feel like you should be grateful for scraps of their attention. He wasn't wrong. Growing up, Alyssa had always been the golden child, the cheerleader, the homecoming queen, the one who married the high school quarterback and gave our parents their first grandchildren. I'd been the studious one, the responsible one, the one who married a kind-hearted science teacher instead of someone with prospects. I'm done asking, I said firmly. I'm done hoping they'll change. We'll make our own traditions. Dave reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We already have, and our kids are happy. He was right. We didn't have lake houses or fancy camps, but we'd created our own special moments. Weekend camping trips to Sweetwater Creek, the annual Science Museum membership that Jake treasured, the community garden plot where Madison was growing her first vegetables. The next morning, I was sorting through the mail when I found a thick envelope from Wildwood Adventure Camp in Maine. Addressed to my parents, but delivered to our house by mistake. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But something in me snapped. A lifetime of playing by the rules while watching my sister get special treatment had worn my patience thin. Inside was a receipt for a 2-week stay at the camp for Carter and Emma. The total, $8,600. Plus confirmation of my parents' own stay at a nearby resort for the same period. Another $5,400. $14,000. To spoil my niece and nephew while my kids got nothing but excuses about how we should all live within our means. I took a photo of the receipt before resealing the envelope and dropping it in my neighbor's mailbox. Let the postal carrier find it and deliver it properly tomorrow. That evening, I researched Wildwood Adventure Camp. It catered to exceptional children from discerning families and offered everything from horseback riding to sailing lessons, the kind of place that would look impressive on college applications someday, the kind of opportunity my parents had decided my children didn't deserve. We should do something special this summer, too, I told Dave as we discussed the day's events. Something the kids will remember. I've been thinking the same thing, he said. I've been putting aside a little each month. We have about $3,000 saved up. It wasn't $14,000, but it was something. And unlike my parents' money, ours came with no strings attached, No subtle messages about who deserved what. I started planning immediately, not a lavish trip to compete with my parents, but something meaningful. I remembered how Jake had been fascinated by the tide pools when we visited the Oregon coast 2 years ago, how Madison had collected shells and carefully labeled them in a little notebook. The Pacific Northwest was a far cry from Maine, but it had its own magic. I found an affordable rental cottage near Cannon Beach. It wasn't fancy, but it had 2 bedrooms and was just a short walk from the ocean. I booked it for 10 days in July, precisely when my niece and nephew would be at their exclusive camp. Then I did something I'd never done before. I didn't tell my parents about our plans. When my mother called the following Sunday for our weekly check-in, she mentioned the camp again. Carter and Emma are so excited. It's all they talk about. Your dad and I found this lovely resort nearby. We'll take them out for dinner every few days. Make sure they're settling in. That sounds nice, I said neutrally. You know, we'd love to do something special with Madison and Jake sometime too. Her voice took on that insincere tone that always made my skin crawl. Maybe over Christmas break? Nothing as expensive as the camp, of course, but perhaps a day trip somewhere. The condescension was so thick I could almost taste it. A day trip versus a 2-week luxury camp. As if my children should be grateful for whatever scraps my parents deign to throw their way. No need, Mom. We've got our own plans. Oh, what are you doing? Just something small. You know how it is. Living within our means. I could practically hear her frown through the phone. My mother hated when I threw her own words back at her. Well, I hope you're not going to make the children feel left out when they hear about their cousin's adventures. And there it was, the trademark guilt trip, the implication that any unhappiness my children felt was my fault for not providing what my parents gave so freely to Alyssa's kids. My children are just fine, Mom. They have plenty of adventures. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, trembling slightly with anger and an emotion I couldn't quite name. Determination, maybe, or the first stirrings of a plan that went beyond a simple vacation. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, Family Spending Tracker. Then I created a table with 2 columns, for Carter and Emma and for Madison and Jake. I entered what I knew, $14,000 for the camp and resort. On our side, $3,000 for the Oregon trip. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about the pattern, the years of unequal treatment disguised as helping Alyssa through a rough time that had somehow become the permanent state of affairs. I started digging through old emails, text messages, even Facebook posts. Anything that mentioned gifts, trips, or special outings with the grandchildren. I made notes of everything I could verify. The private swimming lessons my parents had paid for, $2,400 over 2 years. The new laptops for schoolwork, $3,200. The monthly fun days where they took Carter and Emma shopping or to expensive attractions, at least $250 per outing, 12 times a year for the past 5 years, about $15,000 total. By contrast, my children had received birthday and Christmas gifts, usually clothes or books. Practical items. Nothing frivolous, nothing extraordinary. No special outings, no private lessons, no technology upgrades. The disparity was stark when laid out in black and white. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about the time, the attention, the obvious favoritism that my parents didn't even try to hide anymore. I wasn't looking for equal spending. I understood that Alyssa, as a single mother, needed more support than Dave and I did. But the gap wasn't just significant, it was insulting. And the way they framed it, as if my children somehow didn't fit in with their cousins, as if they were less deserving, that was what really made my blood boil. As I stared at the growing list, a plan began to form. Not a confrontation. Those never worked with my parents, who would just accuse me of being jealous and petty. No, this required something more strategic, more public. Something that would force them to see what they'd been doing all these years and make it impossible for them to dismiss or explain away. I just needed the right moment. And I had a feeling it would come soon enough. 3 months later, our trip to Oregon was everything I'd hoped for. The cottage was rustic but cozy, with a view of the ocean from the small deck. We explored tide pools, hiked through forests, and spent evenings around a bonfire on the beach, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Jake meticulously documented all the marine life we found in a journal Dave bought him, while Madison collected interesting stones and pieces of driftwood to make a sculpture. On our third day there, I took dozens of photos of the kids beaming with joy as they rode horses along the beach for the first time. An excursion that cost a fraction of what my parents were spending in Maine, but was no less magical for my children. I posted a few pictures on Facebook with a simple caption, "Making memories that matter. No fancy camp needed." Within an hour, my mother called. "The children look like they're having a wonderful time," she said, her voice tight. "You never mentioned you were going to Oregon. You never asked about our summer plans, Mom. You were too busy telling me about Carter and Emma's camp." A pause. "Well, it looks lovely. Though I hope you're being careful with your spending. Dave's school district doesn't pay that much, and those kinds of trips can add up." I bit back a retort about $14,000 for a 2-week camp. Instead, I said, "We're doing just fine. The kids are having the time of their lives." After we hung up, I posted another photo. This one of Madison and Jake building an elaborate sandcastle, their faces alight with concentration and joy. Caption, "The only exclusive experience children need is the exclusive attention of people who love them exactly as they are." My phone pinged with a text from Alyssa. "Cute pics. Mom seems upset. What's going on?" I hesitated. Alyssa and I had never been close, and after her divorce, the gap had widened even further as our parents circled their wagons around her. But she wasn't a bad person, just someone who'd grown accustomed to being the family favorite and had never questioned the disparity in how our children were treated. "Nothing's going on," I texted back. "Just enjoying our vacation." "Seems like you're trying to make a point with those captions." I stared at her message for a long moment. Was this an opening? A chance to finally address the elephant in the room? "Do you think it's fair that Mom and Dad spend thousands on your kids and barely acknowledge mine?" I finally wrote. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "They help me because I'm a single mom. You have Dave." That doesn't explain why my kids are explicitly excluded from family vacations, or why Mom told me they don't fit in with your kids. Another long pause. "She said that? That's not okay." It was the first time Alyssa had ever acknowledged, even indirectly, that something was off about our parents' behavior. I felt a tiny crack in the wall that had stood between us for years. "No, it's not," I replied, "but it's been going on for a long time." "I didn't know," she wrote. "I mean, I knew they did more for my kids, but I didn't know they were actually excluding yours." I believed her. Alyssa lived in her own bubble, and our parents were careful to control the narrative. In their version, I was the difficult daughter who didn't appreciate their generosity, who was jealous of the help they gave to poor, struggling Alyssa. "We should talk when you get back," Alyssa texted, for real. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small shift in the family dynamic that I hadn't anticipated. The rest of our vacation passed in a blur of happy moments. I continued to post photos, though I toned down the captions. This wasn't about creating family drama. It was about standing up for my children and refusing to let them be treated as less than. When we returned home, bronzed and relaxed, there was a message from my father on our answering machine. "Lynn, your mother and I would like to have dinner with you and Dave next week. Just adults. We need to talk." His tone was stern, as if I were a misbehaving teenager rather than a grown woman with children of my own. It was the same tone he'd used whenever I dared to question the family's unspoken rules growing up. Alyssa gets more because Alyssa needs more. Don't be selfish. Don't rock the boat. I played the message for Dave, who rolled his eyes. "Here we go. The intervention. How dare you enjoy a vacation with your children without our permission or supervision?" "Maybe they've realized how unfair they've been," I said, though I didn't really believe it. Dave gave me a skeptical look. "Or maybe they want to make sure you know your place." I called my father back and agreed to dinner the following Friday. Then I spent the next few days gathering evidence. I printed out my spreadsheet of their spending on each set of grandchildren. I collected screenshots of text messages where my mother had made excuses for not including my children in family events. And I wrote down, in clear, unemotional language, how their behavior had made me and my children feel over the years. When Friday came, Dave and I dressed carefully. Not too formal, not too casual. The message, we're taking this seriously, but we're not trying to impress you. We met my parents at Riverside Grill, a mid-range restaurant in Peachtree City where they like to have their serious conversations. Public enough to prevent a scene, private enough for difficult discussions. My mother hugged me stiffly when we arrived. "You look tired, honey. That trip must have been exhausting." And there it was, right out of the gate, the subtle dig, the implication that our choices were somehow incorrect or harmful. "Actually, I'm feeling great. The kids are already asking when we can go back." We ordered drinks and made small talk until the appetizers arrived. Then my father cleared his throat. "Lynn, your mother and I are concerned about this attitude you've been displaying lately." I raised an eyebrow. "Attitude? Those Facebook posts, the passive-aggressive comments, it's not like you." My mother jumped in, her voice dripping with concern. "Honey, we know you've always been a bit sensitive about what we do for Alyssa's children, but turning it into a public spectacle isn't healthy." I took a sip of my wine, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. Dave squeezed my knee under the table, a silent show of support. "I'm not sensitive, Mom. I'm observant. This text depicts a moment of confrontation, where a daughter is finally standing up to her parents for the years of favoritism they have shown toward her sister's children while neglecting her own. The tension is palpable as she lays out the facts, forcing her parents to face their behavior and the hurt they've caused. It's a powerful scene about addressing long-held resentment and exposing the inequalities within family dynamics. Here's the exact text you requested, and what I've observed over the years is a pattern of favoritism so blatant it's almost comical." My father's face reddened. "Now wait just a minute." I held up a hand. "Let me finish. For years, I've watched you lavish attention, money, and opportunities on Carter and Emma while treating Madison and Jake as afterthoughts. I've made excuses for you, to myself, to Dave, even to my children. Grandma and Grandpa are helping Aunt Alyssa because she's on her own. They already had plans with your cousins? Maybe next time." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. "But then you crossed a line. You told me my children don't fit in with their cousins, that they would be a nuisance on your precious family vacation. That's not helping Alyssa. That's rejecting my children." My mother's face paled. "I never used the word nuisance." "Actually, you did." I slid a printed copy of a text message across the table. "Last December, when I asked if Madison and Jake could join the ski trip." My father glanced at the message, then pushed it away as if it were contaminated. "This is ridiculous. We're not going to sit here and be accused of what? Not spending enough on your kids? You've always been jealous of your sister, Lynn. Always." I pulled out the spreadsheet next. "This isn't about jealousy. It's about facts. In the past 5 years, you've spent approximately $42,000 on Carter and Emma's activities, trips, and gifts. For Madison and Jake, less than $4,000. My mother gasped. "You've been keeping track? Like some kind of accountant? That's so petty." "No, what's petty is telling your daughter that her children don't belong in family activities. What's petty is creating a 2-tier system of grandchildren, the special ones and the others." Dave leaned forward. "We've never asked for financial help. We've always been grateful for whatever you choose to give. But the consistency with which you exclude our children while including Alyssa's isn't about money. It's about value. It sends a clear message about which grandchildren matter to you." My father's face was now an alarming shade of purple. "This is outrageous. We've done everything for this family. Everything. Alyssa needed extra support after that bastard left her. She was devastated. The children were devastated. And that justifies 6 years of treating my children like they're less important?" I countered. "Alyssa's been devastated for a long time now. She's dating again. She has a good job. The narrative that she needs constant rescuing is just an excuse to maintain the status quo you've always preferred. Alyssa as the golden child, me as the afterthought." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "How can you say such horrible things? We love all our grandchildren equally." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "No, Mom, you don't. And the fact that you can sit there and say that with a straight face is exactly the problem." I pulled out my phone and opened Facebook. Would you like to know what Madison asked me last week? She asked why Grandma and Grandpa don't like her as much as they like Carter and Emma. She's 8 years old, and she already knows she's less valued. Like my father's anger seemed to deflate slightly. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you spent a day alone with Madison or Jake? When was the last time you called them just to chat or showed up at one of their school events? I can tell you exactly when. Never. Meanwhile, you're at every one of Carter and Emma's games, recitals, and award ceremonies. My parents exchanged glances. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something that might have been recognition or even shame. We didn't realize, my mother began. Yes, you did, I cut her off. You just didn't care enough to change. Or maybe you didn't think I'd ever call you on it. But I'm done pretending this is normal or acceptable. My children deserve better. I stood up, gathering my evidence back into the folder. Dave and I are leaving now. When you're ready to acknowledge what you've done and commit to treating all your grandchildren with equal love and consideration, we can talk again. Until then, we'll continue making our own traditions and memories without you. My father reached out, grabbing my wrist. Lynn, don't be dramatic. Sit down. We can discuss this like adults. I gently but firmly removed his hand. There's nothing more to discuss right now. You need time to think about whether you want a relationship with all your grandchildren or just the ones you've decided are worthy. As we walked out of the restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in years. Standing up to my parents hadn't been about revenge. It had been about finally refusing to participate in a dynamic that hurt my children. Dave put his arm around me as we reached the car. You did good in there, really good. I'm not sure it will change anything, I admitted. Maybe not right away. But you spoke your truth. That matters. I didn't hear a word from my parents after our confrontational dinner. Alyssa texted a few times, asking what had happened. I gave her the highlights without going into detail. She seemed genuinely disturbed by some of what I shared, especially the "don't fit in" comment. I always thought they were just helping me because I needed it, she wrote. I never wanted it to be at your kids' expense. I know, I replied. And I did know. Alyssa had her flaws, but deliberately orchestrating the exclusion of my children wasn't one of them. She'd simply benefited from a system our parents had created and maintained. 2 weeks after our dinner confrontation, my mother showed up at our door, unannounced. She looked smaller somehow, less certain of herself. Can I come in? She asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. The kids were at summer day camp, and Dave was at work. It was just us, something that rarely happened anymore. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us until my mother finally spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our dinner, and looking back at things. Messages, photos, calendars. She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I didn't want to believe what you were saying. It was easier to think you were just being sensitive or jealous. I waited, not making it easier for her. But when I really looked at the evidence, well, the pattern is hard to ignore. We have spent more time with Carter and Emma. We have given them more opportunities. We have excluded your children. It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged it directly. No excuses, no justifications. The question is why, I said quietly. She looked down at her hands. It wasn't conscious, at least not at first. After Alyssa's divorce, we just fell into this role of filling the gap left by Rick, being extra grandparents to make up for an absent father, and it felt good being needed that way. And with us, with Madison and Jake, you and Dave were so competent, so organized, you never seemed to need our help, and whenever we did offer suggestions, you usually had your own way of doing things. I almost laughed. So you punished my children because Dave and I were functioning adults? No, we just gravitated toward where we felt most useful, most appreciated, and over time it became a habit, a bad one, clearly. It wasn't a full explanation, and we both knew it. The favoritism had started long before Alyssa's divorce, though perhaps in more subtle ways. What happens now? I asked. My mother straightened her shoulders. Your father and I have been talking, a lot, about changes we need to make. Real ones, not just promises. Such as? For starters, we've canceled our second week at the resort near the camp. We're going to fly back after dropping off Carter and Emma, and then we'd like to take Madison and Jake for a special week, anywhere they want to go within reason. It was a start, a small one, but still. And we've set up education funds for all 4 grandchildren, equal amounts. That was more substantial. But most importantly, she continued, we want to rebuild our relationship with Madison and Jake. Not with grand gestures or expensive trips, but with time. Regular time. We've blocked off every other Saturday to spend with them, just doing whatever they enjoy. I felt a cautious optimism rising. And you've discussed this with Dad? He's on board? It was his idea, actually. The education funds. After you left the restaurant, he was angry at first. But then, I don't know, something shifted. He went through all those papers you brought, really looked at them. And later that night, he admitted that you were right, that we'd failed as grandparents to your children. I hadn't expected that. My father rarely admitted to being wrong about anything. I'd like to believe you, I said slowly, but this pattern goes back years. It won't change overnight. No, it won't, she agreed. We have a lot to make up for, and I understand if you're skeptical, but we'd like the chance to try, if you'll let us. I thought about my children, how Madison's face lit up whenever she talked about her grandparents, despite their neglect. How Jake had stopped mentioning them altogether, a self-protective measure that broke my heart. It's not just about equal spending or scheduled visits, I said finally. It's about genuine interest in who they are. Madison loves art and storytelling. Jake is fascinated by science and nature. Do you know their favorite books, their fears, their dreams? Those are the things that matter. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I want to know those things. I really do. I've missed so much. Yes, you have. I felt no need to soften the blow, and it will take time to earn back their trust. And mine. We know that. We're prepared for that. I nodded slowly. Then you can start this Saturday. Jake has a science fair presentation at the community center. You and Dad should come. Not to take him anywhere or buy him anything, just to watch him explain his project and tell him how proud you are. Relief washed over my mother's face. We'll be there. What time? 11 o'clock. And Mom, if you cancel or make it about anything other than Jake and his achievement, we're done. For good. She nodded solemnly. I understand. After she left, I sat alone in the living room for a long time, processing what had happened. It wasn't a total victory. The years of favoritism couldn't be erased by one conversation or a handful of promises. But it was a beginning. Over the next few months, things changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but significantly. My parents kept their word about the regular visits with Madison and Jake. Sometimes they took them places, the aquarium, a pottery studio, hiking trails, and sometimes they just came over to play board games or help with homework. The education funds had been set up, with the paperwork sent to both me and Alyssa for transparency. Equal amounts, as promised. Most importantly, I'd seen a genuine effort to know my children, to ask about their interests, to listen to their stories, to celebrate their accomplishments, no matter how small. There were still moments of awkwardness, still occasional slips where the old patterns showed through. But when I called them out, my parents acknowledged the mistake and corrected course. Alyssa and I had started talking more regularly, too. She'd been horrified when I showed her the full extent of the disparity in our parents' treatment of our children. I knew they did more for us, she'd said, but not like this. Never like this. She'd started making an effort to include Madison and Jake in activities with her kids, weekend outings, movie nights, even a joint camping trip where the cousins had finally started to bond without the weight of our parents' favoritism hanging over them. And me? I felt lighter, stronger. Standing up for my children had healed something in me, too. That lingering sense that I was somehow less worthy, less valuable than my sister. That my family was somehow less deserving of love and attention. Dave and I still planned our own traditions, our own special trips and moments. But now they existed alongside, not in defiance of, my parents' involvement in our lives. On Christmas Eve, as we all gathered at my parents' house, Dave and I, our children, Alyssa and her new boyfriend, Carter and Emma, I watched as my father helped Jake set up the new telescope he'd bought him. A gift that showed he'd been paying attention when Jake talked about his fascination with astronomy. Nearby, my mother and Madison were looking through a book of famous artworks, my mother listening intently as Madison explained which painters she liked best and why. It wasn't perfect. Healing rarely is. but it was real progress, hard won through confrontation and truth-telling. Alyssa sidled up next to me, handing me a glass of wine. "They're really trying?" "Yes," she said quietly, nodding toward our parents. "They are," I agreed. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." "What they were doing?" I shrugged. "It was easier not to see it." "Still, I should have been a better sister." I clinked my glass against hers. "We're figuring it out now. That's what matters." Later that night, as Dave and I tucked our children into the guest room beds they'd never used before this year, Madison looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Mommy, I think Grandma and Grandpa like us now." The simplicity of her observation caught in my throat. "They always liked you, sweetie. They just didn't show it very well. But they're learning." "I like it better this way," she murmured, already drifting off to sleep. "Me too," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "Me too." As I closed their door and headed back to the living room where the adults were still talking, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in my parents' house for decades. Not since I was a child myself, before I understood the subtle hierarchies of family favoritism. I'd fought for my children's place in this family, not with rage or accusations, but with evidence and boundaries and a refusal to accept less than they deserved. And in doing so, I'd reclaimed something for myself too. The knowledge that I was worthy of respect, that my family was worthy of love, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own diminishment. It wasn't revenge I'd wanted in the end. It was recognition. Recognition that my children were just as valuable, just as deserving of love and attention as their cousins. That our family was just as important as Alyssa's. And finally, after all these years, we had it.